Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today for the first online edition of the Viantis Enterprise Days. I'm Anthony from the marketing team at Viantis in France, and I'm delighted to see you here. The session will start in a few seconds, but I first wanted to share with you some practical information. As you may have noticed, we'll all be in mute mode during the presentation, so you can't talk to us directly. However, I invite you to use the chat box to leave your comments and your questions, as there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Finally, as some of you may have understood, this session has been pre-recorded to avoid any technical problems or last-minute cancellation. But we will be in live at the end to answer your questions with the speakers. Thanks again for your participation, and see you right after.
Hi, hello everyone. My name's Jim Damato, and I'm here to talk to you about how you can't teach a kid to ride a bike through PowerPoint. A more serious title would be Lessons Learned from Executives about Agile Transformations. Excuse me. Just a hair about me. My name is, again, Jim Damato. I am an Agile Transformation lead with Elias & Group. In a normal presentation, I would spend about 20-30 minutes on this slide talking about myself, but I only have 20 or 30 minutes to talk to you. So I guess I'll kind of gloss over this slide because it's not really that important. The only thing to know about me really on a technical level is that I've got an alphabet soup of certifications after my last name. I've been around, I've done a lot of things, and I have a particular passion about applying Agile in a non-software context. I think a little bit more about what's kind of interesting about me is two things. Number one, over on the left, that's a picture of my kitchen. I practice this Agile stuff at home, and you know, there's a lot of people who I think advocate for things that they don't necessarily believe in. I believe in this stuff at my core, and I even managed to convince my wife to do some of it with me. And of course, I was a little heavy-handed at first, and she gently corrected me. But you know, I remember one day I was traveling, and I called her at the end of the day when I'd gotten back to my hotel, and she said to me, "Oh, hey, I planned." And I remember thinking, "Really? You did? You planned without me?" She said, "Yeah, I'm bought in. I like this stuff. I think it works." So I feel like if I can convince my wife to do something, I can probably convince anyone to do it. I believe in this stuff at my core, and I do even practice it at home. And I probably will end up being that person who ends up raising a couple of Agile kids. I don't know how this is going to go, but we'll see in, you know, about 18-20 years. So, all right, enough about the intro. Let's get into the nitty-gritty here. When I had the opportunity to put these slides together and to think about this conversation, there were a lot of things that came to mind that I could actually talk about. Agile consultants are full of advice. You go through a lot, you've been in a lot of places, you've seen a lot of situations, some of it good and some of it bad. And you feel like you come with a lot of advice to dispense. The challenge is, and hence the title of the presentation, when you're trying to talk to people about the way they should think, there's a perception that a lot of this stuff is kind of radically different. And just like with talking to a spouse or talking to a child, they generally don't want to listen to you. It doesn't matter who in the client it is, although generally the higher up, the more prevalent it is. But people often need to figure things out for themselves. And going through a number of different PowerPoint slides of trying to dispense wisdom and knowledge doesn't really work. People need to figure this out for themselves. So what I'm here to do today is talk about the top things that I have seen executives come to realize about going through their agile transformations. And to be clear, not every transformation actually works. Some of these lessons only come after they've been through it and after something didn't work, because sometimes we learn the most when we failed, and that's when the real learning happens, the real wisdom happens. So I also tried to decide how much to actually offer. I feel like I could probably talk for days. I'm a consultant. I like to hear myself talk. It makes me good at my job. But I thought to myself, if you try to overload your audience with 15 different things to remember, you're not going to do justice to any of them, and no one's going to remember. So I tried to come up with my top 4. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So the agenda: don't customize to start, teams prototype, leaders transform, align for success, and you're never done. And so if you want to drop now, that's the basis of the presentation. If you're doing the high-level summary audiobook, well, that's it. But if you want to stick around, I'll go into detail about all of this stuff. So the first one, don't customize to start. So a very common pattern I see when I go and I work with companies is there's this idea that the idea that certain things won't work here. And people often want to change how Agile is going to work in their particular environment. They want to customize right off at the beginning, and it's a fool's errand. We have in the Agile world this idea of something called shu-ha-ri. Shu is the idea that at first you're going to learn the rules, okay? Learn the concepts. Ha is the idea that you're going to practice the rules and become good at it. And Ri is the idea that you're going to then begin to own the rules or even transcend the rules. The Agile world has its roots in lean manufacturing. Lean manufacturing is the godfather of Agile. And lean manufacturing really got its start in the Toyota production system. So we have a lot of Japanese influence, hence the idea of the concept of shu-ha-ri. But the concept isn't necessarily unique to Japan. Beginner, intermediate, expert, apprentice, journeyman, master. The concept is prevalent, right? So shu-ha-ri. And there is always the overriding challenge of working with a customer and saying to them, let's try to do this by the book first. Get a feeling for how this works, get a feeling for what works well for you and what doesn't, and then we'll work on customizing. As an Agile coach, part of my particular style, all Agile coaches have a style. It generally flows somewhere on a continuum between being a purist and being a realist. I trend more towards the realist side. And part of that is the idea that the end justifies the means, right? So if I am able to get a particular outcome that's important to me to make Agile work, I personally don't really care how I get it. But that's because I understand how this works as a system. Agile is a system. And if you don't really quite understand the things that you're tweaking when you tweak them, it can all come crashing down. Hence the idea, start with the basics, do it by the book to the degree that you can. Get good at it, and then begin to change things for how you need. You don't even necessarily need to change it. You don't necessarily need to stay by the book for that long. I want to be careful here because I'm talking as a person who transcends the rules, or at least I like to think I do. Maybe a colleague or two might disagree with me, but get the feeling down first for how it works by the book, and then inject your customizations. I would offer that this is pretty important. Um, I happen to live in Washington, D.C. It's a pretty interesting place to live. And we have some local companies that I happen to know very well. And I know that they've all been through their own Agile transformations. One particular financial institution went through their Agile transformation 4 times before they finally got it right. It was on the 4th try where they finally got it right. Each one leading up was, well, we want to change it because that doesn't work for us here. And you end up picking and choosing the pieces of Agile that work for you, but those are probably the ones that are easy. And those are probably the concepts, the tools, the techniques that you're already doing, or that aren't that hard to do and you're not that far away from it. Those probably aren't the areas, excuse me, that you really actually need to improve. Agile is a system. If there's pieces that you're not doing, those are the ones that you need to strive for, right? Another organization, they deal, another financial institution, it was on their 3rd transformation that they finally got it right. They said, let's stop thinking that we're smarter than this. Let's just do it and get it done and get it done right. I know one other institution, they went so far as to literally eliminate all positions in their business unit. They literally did it. Nobody got fired. Nobody lost their paycheck, but all jobs were eliminated. And everybody had to reapply for new positions that were specifically Agile positions. It's a little bit of an extreme approach. Don't get me wrong, but it was effective. There was a lot of churn, there was a lot of pain on the way. But if you're going to make the hardest turn possible towards doing it by the book, this is really a pretty darn good way. And to be clear, even regardless, I've given you some financial industry examples. I even had one customer that was a hardware focused organization. They made industrial electronics. The group I worked with made circuit breakers, some from the size of the wall behind me, all the way down to the little ones in the control panel in your house. And they had certain constraints that they needed to deal with. And they thought that Agile would change for them, but it doesn't. Agile, when done right, doesn't change. Scrum, when done right, doesn't change, regardless of what your environment you're in, right? The practices, the principles, they don't change. Some of how you interpret them can, okay? Certain constraints may prevent you from having short sprints, like, oh, I don't know if you have to grow a cell culture. That takes time. If you have to send things out to be fabricated, sometimes it just takes time. But the idea of having someone to do strong prioritization, having that would be a product owner, having someone to do to remove impediments like a scrum master, having time boxes, okay, having an ordered backlog of prioritized work, all of that doesn't change. So the key to getting started is the idea of do it by the book. Don't start customizing right off the bat. All right. Next idea. Whenever I work with organizations, we generally start in 2 places. We either start at the bottom or we start at the top. Starting at the top is often more effective. And yet you can't ignore the bottom either. It's important to recognize that Agile is about people and it's not about work. So let's unpack this a little bit. Often, The more senior leaders in an organization are happy to let the lower levels experiment with agile principles, agile practices, agile techniques. Uh, but they don't really want to get involved until there's some sort of proof of success. Uh, we see this a lot. They want to let it have its time to see if there's something actually usable here, and then they'll divert their attention and get involved. Very common. Uh, but what's important for leaders to do in this kind of a scenario is to make sure that they actually get out of the way. Give the teams the space, give the teams the air cover so that they can go out and prototype, so that they can go and experiment with this stuff, starting by the book, understanding that there are so many different tentacles, dependency tentacles into the rest of the organization. And if this is going to be given a chance to work, it needs to live in a bubble. And to the degree that you can create a bubble around a team or a group of teams, you'll be well served. It's a good idea to start with a few teams rather than going with the whole organization at once. Do some prototyping with some teams, see how it feels, try some new things, get from the shoe into the hostage, understand what works in your organization, and then bring it to new teams. Now that you've got a pattern of knowing what works, then bring it to new teams. Now, in order for true transformation to happen, leaders need to be involved. There is cultural aspects that a given team cannot change. There is strategy and organizational scar tissue that the historical way of this is how we've always done it, that a team just can't break through. But leaders have the unique ability to wave their hand and say it shall be different. Now, of course, we need to make sure that everyone's motivated. One of the core agile principles that we live by in my world is that you need to work with motivated individuals. If somebody's not particularly interested in participating, they can make it impossible to transform. People need to be willing participants and not the kind of arm twisting of that you will be a willing participant. No. The kind of willingness that comes from your heart to say, I like this. In order to have true transformation, leaders need to set the big, hairy, audacious goals to say, this is what we think we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do it. Leaders often only want to come to the table when there's some sort of pain that they're going through, or they have some sort of a vision of how it should be different. Pain, something's going wrong, there's a burning building. I'm putting up my air quotes for burning building. Something is going badly wrong. If you have a feeling of our backs are against the wall, one of my customers said that to me, you probably have a lot of what you need to inject change. I live in Washington, D.C. There's an old saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. Another way to change is for vision. Sometimes people have just had the idea, the inspiration that there's a new and a better way. And they want to go and achieve that. That's the harder way. Pain is easy to rally around and to try to change. Vision, not necessarily quite as easy. Right? It will fundamentally change how you think about work. But in order for all of this to happen, it's leaders who need to be the ones who are helping it to happen. The most successful transformation that I worked with, we didn't necessarily have the greatest introduction. I came in hot and I came in fast. I didn't have any time for discovery. It was out of the frying pan into the fire. Heck, there was no frying pan, right into the fire. But you know what made it work? the sponsor, the VP that I was working for, actively elbowed space, cleared space for me to do my job. And we reduced their cycle times 75% for new product development, 75%. And they got 50% more productivity out of it. It was pretty solid. So amazing things can happen, but it's the practice, the reps start at the bottom, but it's only the leaders who can clear the space for it to actually happen. Now, there are a couple of different ways to try to align. And without alignment, things are not going to work. In preparation for this presentation, I queried some of my peers at Eliason, and I said, what are the top 2 things that you've heard as being the biggest lesson learned? And out of the 5 people I spoke with, each one of their bullets was the idea of alignment. Now, everybody had a different idea of alignment. There's alignment up front and there's alignment downstream. Let's talk a little bit about that. Alignment up front, upstream alignment, is the idea of starting with why. You've got to understand why you're doing this. And if you can't communicate the why, it's generally not going to work. It helps to decide up front, what does success actually look like? If you can't inspire with the idea of what success looks like, if you can't say that we want 20% more of this or 10% less of that, if you can't define what success looks like, people have a tough time knowing what goals they're striving for on the horizon. Agile is about outcomes. It's not a robotic series of actions, right? It's about a change in how you actually think about work. It's an understanding that there are different ways. Dare I say, it's the idea of applying manufacturing management principles and taking them and applying them to knowledge work. The greatest productivity gains that we've ever had have been through manufacturing, right? All the different revolutions that have happened in history, well, they've all come through manufacturing. And as work has gotten more complex, as knowledge work has gotten more complex, the ideas that we've taken out of the Industrial Revolution with Frederick Taylor and scientific management and applying that to knowledge work, as work has gotten more complex, that's started to fall by the wayside. And what we've started to realize is that there are new techniques for knowledge work that are very powerful. So we want to first decide why we're doing this and align with why, start with why, and then define what success will look like. But as we begin to implement, we all need to be sure that we're pulling in the same direction. And that's critical, because if we're all judged by different criteria, then we're all pulling in different directions. One of my favorite stories is an example of one of my clients had a manufacturing line that was down, and they needed a part to be shipped from overseas, critical piece, in order to get the manufacturing line back up and running. They had production orders that were sitting on hold. And they were judged by how much they got done, but the organization that was sending the part was judged on their profit and loss. And they said, well, okay, we'll ship the part on the weekend because the shipping rates are cheaper. Whereas the other plant was down and they had no way to deliver their revenue. People in different groups have different alignments and different ideas of what success looks like. But if they're not aligned, then we're all pulling in different directions, and it's going to be hard to find that place where we're going to be successful. Now, On the last slide, I just said something about the idea that, you need to have a big, hairy, audacious goal, that we want 20% more of something or 10% less of something else, or whatever your outcomes, your desired outcomes happen to be. That suggests that there's a point where you're done. Well, not necessarily, because if you want 20% more, just because you got 20% more, do you not then strive for 22 or 23% more? Just because you got 20% more of something, do you not then also say, well, wait a minute, this isn't necessarily nirvana. We need to now strive for 10% less of something else. The thing about Agile and the idea that it's about continuous improvement and about adjusting to the change that comes. Continuous improvement implies that it's continuous. You never stop trying to improve, because pretty generally there's something more to improve on. Because if you stop, I guarantee one of your competitors isn't. Okay. And the idea that continuous improvement leads to the idea that there's always more to do. And so this is why we say you're never done. Okay? And this is not an aspect of consultants wanting to continue to be able to bill. You should believe, if this is being done right, that for every dollar you're spending, you're getting that dollar times X benefit back. So if I was to say that for every dollar you give me, I'll give you that times something back, depending on what that X is, you won't be able to stop investing. You might say, well, maybe this is Bitcoin, but no. If I was to say that for every dollar invested, you got $2 in benefit back, you don't stop investing, right? The world changes. Change never stops, and you need to be able to keep up with that. Change never stops. Improvement never stops. You're actually never done. All right. New people come into your organization. They don't necessarily understand how you do things. You're never done trying to ensure that everybody is up to speed. New technologies come into your organization. You're never done trying to improve. Agile, the Agile techniques, the principles, the practices are your secret weapon to make all of it work. You're never done. With that said, just to recap, we've talked about don't customize to start, teams prototype, but leaders transform, align for success, and you're never done. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Valiantis for this opportunity to present to all of you. Thank you, Anthony. Back to you.